when we came up with this idea, we were talking about what we should call it, and so that's how it ended up with the or how not to be a magical douche portion. And so I promised I would leave that in, because it's good. So. Most of everything that is on the slides is going to be in your booklets, which I did on purpose so that we can fly through this, because you can go back at any time you like and read through it, and we don't have to concentrate so much on all the informational portion of it. We can get to the discussion part where it will actually do us some good in making ethical decisions. The biggest part of this is understanding who you are, how you think, how you got the way you are, so that for you, making a decision will be about you and your interactions with the world and not somebody else's decision for you. So my take on this then is that the self-awareness and self-understanding for your particular situation is what's going to be vital for you to affect positive change in your world. We make these positive changes inside and outside of ourselves. We are not islands. I'm not the hermit on top of the mountaintop. We are not going to only affect ourselves. Everything is interrelated. I really liked this statement here of personal development is the starting and ending point of all acts of service and transformation. Everything we do makes progress in our personal development, maybe for our betterment or detriment. Part of this is to try to help stay on the betterment path rather than being of a detriment to ourselves. Yeah. Magic is transformation, which is what we're trying to do for ourselves as well. Acting with integrity and honor and respect for all of the rest of the world, but for ourselves as well. So it kind of comes down to don't be a douche, do no harm, those kinds of things. Also, don't be a lemming, don't follow the crowd just because that's the convenient thing to do, or any other the other unsavory creature references we could make to that. This is about being our best selves, or at least not being a douche, because we will find on occasion the best choice is still crappy, and that's all you're left with. So you may not have a choice there. I kind of went through the route of defining some terms too, but the thought exercise pieces of this are, notice your thoughts about things as we go through some of this material, because you may find that, you know, with communication and language, that's pretty straightforward and not, you know, a point of contention with most people. But some of these other terms, you're going to have a very different response than someone else might. We use in communications of all varieties. Our languages are written and spoken, but they may be gestural, sign language can be. You will have the denotation and connotation of things. The denotation is the literal definition of it. There probably is no real wiggle room particularly there. I went through like 3 different dictionaries and some other stuff to come up with what I put on these slides. That part's pretty much anybody can look it up and find out what that is. The connotation, however, is going to be unique to each person. And this is where problems are going to come in with communicating with other people or spirits, or what you're trying to accomplish if you're not using a language that can be shared and common to everybody involved in the process. I'm not going to read through every one of these because that would be silly. I will stop briefly on morals, values, beliefs, that kind of thing. They're not all the exact same thing. Morals has much more to do with that evaluation of whether something's good or correct. So again, this is a very personal process. Everybody's doing the same thing and evaluating it. They're not coming up with the same conclusion. Mores, norms, folkways are very similar concepts, but you get down to folkways, and that's You know, those mundane things that some group in the Appalachians does this particular way, and another group in Chicago is going to do that entirely different. But that's going to be very regional, very specific. Culture and our society has incredible impact upon how each of us thinks and acts. There are going to be different things that are appropriate and inappropriate in every culture and society, and that may be changeable depending on the situation or the people involved. So it changes how everything is depending on that context. A dilemma is kind of what this is about. When you come up with a choice between two possible actions, or more than two possible actions, but none of which is particularly acceptable in and of itself. There's no clear winner as to what the right thing is. Now you've got that ethical or moral dilemma. Hospitality, ghosty, all of those sorts of things of reciprocal agreements where you're talking about those interactions. Again, you're not just thinking about what I would do that's right, what is going to be right for everybody involved in the process. We have touched on some of these other things, the natural, the supernatural, and what the meanings of that is. Magic. I went with the standard projection of natural energies to manifest needed changes kind of thing. The dictionary seems to think that the use of supernatural power over others through assistance of spirits is not specifically divine sorcery, but, you know. Denotation, connotation, the problem again. So. Oops.
Left hand not knowing what right hand is.
A spell, a sigil, a symbol. We do learn to think symbolically before we get into literal definitions of words. We come up with ideas and want to express an entire idea before we come down to the little bits that are words. So, yeah, that was something interesting I find out about language development and that kind of thing. So we are quicker to use symbols to represent something than we are to necessarily use a word for it.
Do you find that each culture has its own unique definition, or they share similar definitions, like the way we sign for water would be?
In some other research, when I was looking into, I had a big thing about illuminated manuscripts when I was going through some of my religion classes, and there are 7, I think, symbol kinds of things that all people see regardless of culture, society, where they were born in the world. You know, it doesn't matter, and those seem to be universal regardless of any other context that people are in. Yeah, I found that very interesting as well. Yes, the wavy kind of line thing is one of them. You know, cross, a circle, or slash, or maybe line. I think we're some of that. Basic ideas of what the dictionary definitions of are, like of things like chance, charms, incantations, that kind of thing. So as we're talking about some of these words, did you realize something new about that? Did you have a strong reaction to some words? When you think about how it is identified sorcery in the dictionary that I looked up as to what you consider sorcery, those kinds of things. Did you notice differences between the denotation of the word and your connotation of those words?
Spent half an hour on witchcraft.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
One of the ways we can get to know ourselves is learning about how we learn to think and how we specifically think as individuals. The cognitive development process is that process of thinking and understanding, how we come to be able to use our intelligence. It is a very complex, interrelated process. It is a dynamic system, meaning that it continuously changes. It consists of states and transformations. Again, very related to magic in that we're looking to make transformations. Well, the part in between that is the state of being that it's in. The balance between those things is the equilibrium you're trying to acquire as you develop your cognitive abilities. Is understanding the difference between the state of being and the transformation and how you get from one to the other and transition back.
Does a lot of our perceptions of what a symbol is or what a word is based on our education and another person's different education may take it entirely different?
There are many factors that feed into what our connotation of some concept or word is.
Connotation being the key. Connotation is always individual, though it's driven by cultural norms.
Yes. Yes. How our cognitive abilities develop is that we form an understanding through our experience. We interpret some new information and figure out how that fits in, and then we revise our understanding of how it is. Obviously, this is much more complicated than writing it on this one little slide, but there are two ways that we do that. Assimilation is to take new information and fit it into our pre-existing cognitive schemas. So how we view that the world works, we get a new piece of information. Assimilation is that piece of information will fit into the grand scheme that we already have. Good. This is easy. People find it easy to assimilate things. Oh, this fits here in my theory of how the world works. Accommodation's a little tougher. Accommodation means you get a piece of new information that does not fit your plan of how the world works. And all of a sudden, you kind of have this internal conflict of, what do I do with it? Now I'm going to have to rearrange how I think the world works in order for this new information to fit. This is much tougher for people to do. Consider how well you deal with new information. Do you accommodate well?
Deny it mostly.
Denial, yeah. Yeah, so accommodation is the much tougher kind of thing. Or is that easy for you? Do you get something new and go like, fine, I'll rearrange everything so that works in too. Chaos. Yeah.
We could point at an accommodation problem that probably everybody here has dealt with, and that is moving from normative cosmology and maybe even a previous ritual system into a new cosmological model and accompanying ritual system.
Yes.
The entering ADF's game involves plenty of assimilation and accommodation behaviors.
Wiccan style stuff and casting a circle, and all of a sudden we have an open space you can come and go from. And
Right.
so how do you resolve that in your head to make that okay?
And then go back.
And possibly go back.
Moving from plugging into abstract God energies to talking to friends or superiors.
Piaget is considered the classic in the stages of cognitive development. Has broken this down into sensory motor, which when we're very young, all we have is the experience of our senses. If we put it in our mouth, we can find information about it. If we can hear it, touch it, all those kinds of things. And that's kind of how we make our decision about how the world works, is by those senses. We get a little bit older, we have a little bit understanding of things outside ourselves, but we're still pretty much tied up in the egocentrism. We have a really hard time seeing it from somebody else's point of view or from outside ourselves, but we're still left with our own experiences to deal with. We tend to put energies into many other things, particularly pets, I'm sure, is one of the most common things of thinking your pet's happy or sad because of some, thing, and relating it to, well, I would be happy if that happened, so the pet is therefore happy because that happened. So we're very much into that kind of thing. And we'll project that onto things like chairs. The chair is not happy because it has other chairs stacked on it. So we're, so we have a lack of concrete operations there to see some of those things. Magical thinking is still very much an operation when we're in those 7 and younger, and even into the next concrete operational phase. You have better concrete logic and inductive reasoning, which somewhere in here it says which one that is. Deductive reasoning is drawing inferences from your observing to make generalizations about it. So we're starting to be able to look at that small thing and go, well, all things like that may tend to be like this. But we don't really get into full logic with abstract thinking and deductive reasoning of being able to take those generalizations and come down to what might actually happen with a specific item until we get into puberty and that kind of thing. I assume that also has to do with the brain chemistry that's happening about that time.
Yeah. Around 13, you get that ability for 6 months, then the hormones kick in, and then they'll be back when you're 19.
And you're an idiot again, yeah. Kind of like girls, yeah. Guys tend to show about 30. There are other theories. There are other ways of thinking about our development. But a portion of this dwarfs hypothesis that builds upon doesn't negate all the things that Piaget has said about it, but it does bring up the point where the structures and contents of the language of our social group definitely will have impact on how we think about things. If all the people around you go ew, ick about something particular, you're likely to go ew, ick about that, regardless of whether there's an ew, ick factor about it. We pick up the cues from the people around us every bit as much as our own experiences. You know, there's that breaking point when we think outside ourselves that we can do that. This hypothesis believes that the language determines our thoughts and perceptions, depending on whether a word exists for something, or if you're Inuit and have 27 words for the kinds of snow, this makes a difference about how you think about something, how important it is, or whether you ignore it, or...
And that's why we're supposed to learn an ancient Indo-European language.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Isaac quoted this, the dwarf hypothesis, like mad back in 1984, in the notion of reconstructing and reaching back into seeing how the ancients thought. Learning to talk like them seemed valuable.
Right.
We never achieved it.
So consider that about how your friends, family, larger society, how that influences how you think about something. When you see a story on the news, or you see something on The Onion, or various sources that come along, you get painted a very different picture about something.
So he was similar, or?
Right, yeah.
Not separated from, but obviously intertwined with the brain's development and how we think is the rest of the psychosocial development. We are learning through our hands-on experience and benefit from others' knowledge. There was something about infants or small children really benefit greatly from the adults in their lives coming along and kind of letting them do something up to a point and then jumping in when they don't know what the stuff is to lead them through it the first time, to help them accomplish it, that there was great benefit to be had from learning that way. We do that in our communities, just like giving one of these workshops. Here, you could go research this yourself, but if somebody helps you walk through some of the things the first time that you look at it, and give you some direction, tell you maybe where some of the better academic sources to look at are, as opposed to the fluff, those kinds of things. So that carries along much later in our lives as well. Our ability to form and maintain interpersonal relations impacts our psychosocial development. That's attachment theory kinds of thinking of what were your first relationships like? Were your caretakers probably your parents, but not necessarily. So that could change how you view the rest of the world by what that relationship looked like as to what kind of context you're seeing the rest of the world, how you're making your generalizations by what your specific situation was like. We all know that the use of reinforcement and punishment obviously is going to affect how you see the world around you. if you grew up in an abusive home, you're going to see something entirely different than if you grew up in the kind of home where everyone was accepting and open and never really got into big fights and that kind of thing. It's obviously going to make a huge difference to you. Freud is our friend. And
You say that with such certainty.
I mean, there are probably still 6 guys in Manhattan who take Freud seriously.
I read one.
Yeah, I'm a Jungian.
I mean, he's a known fraud.
Yeah.
At this point, Freud is pretty much discredited now.
But he did manage to make a theory that kind of makes sense in a certain way.
Nobody talks about the subconscious.
But nobody talks about a lot of this stuff anymore. But there is something to be said for the sexual development of a person is obviously going to impact the way they view the world. I don't think we need to have that discussion here. Ethics! Moving on!
The development of the self-control circuit in the brain at 19 or 20 probably has at least as much to do with it.
There's probably some of that.
There is.
Let's see, what else do we have here? The impact over time of others in mutual interaction and simultaneous influence. Even though I'm the one sitting up front here, obviously your interactions affect me every bit as much as the information I'm trying to give you. So it's always sort of a simultaneous kind of exchange of impacts there. There is a theory, core knowledge perspective, I believe, that holds we are innately born with certain kinds of predisposition to special purpose knowledge systems. Some things are, we know that physiologically we don't have to think to breathe, that happens for us. There may be parts of our brain that are kind of wired to do a particular job, and so it does.
You like talents.
Yeah. That would probably fall under that purview. Erickson's our guy for psychosocial development. He has a theory that we have certain basic conflicts that as our brains develop and our worlds in general, that these conflicts have to be resolved one way or the other. Sometimes we're more successful than others. Some people who do not get good attachment as an infant have a real problem and are always stuck in the conflict of basic trust versus mistrust. I believe next.
That 7th stage is long.
Yeah. Until you're done. Each stage brings new challenges that may not lead to stage mastery. Just because you go through that stage doesn't mean you figured it out. Yeah.
I gotta go back to the
And you may have to go back and learn that lesson again. Yeah.
toilet training.
Each challenge.
Trusting strangers.
Good trusting strangers, yeah. You may go back and learn to mistrust them, yeah. That's the kind of thing. Each challenge advances the negotiation of the biological and socio-cultural conflict. As you work your way through, depending on what level of success you're having with resolving the conflict, it advances your skill in negotiating the next conflict that comes along, though. As you do this more and more, you do learn certain things, and either you'll keep repeating the same mistake until you figure out you're doing that, or you will change something and learn a little differently, a little better, accommodate better, assimilate better, that kind of thing. Each one of them, you can tell from the chart that's in the book there, that each one contains this psychosocial crisis, this thing that has to be resolved somehow. Each stage then builds upon the success of the previous stage. You do not have to master a stage to advance to the next stage. You're obviously going to keep getting older. You're not going to stop at 2 years because you haven't figured out the trust thing. So
You have to redo it.
that's a little more accommodation than I think we could make, but that's yeah. I'm sorry, you can't become 3 years old yet. You want to figure it out how to trust people. Yeah. Unfortunately, however, the unresolved challenges may appear as future problems as you don't know how to deal with that conflict well or how to resolve that issue. Then it's probably going to keep coming up.
Until you
Yes. There is a virtue that's attached to each one of these stages, so successful conflict resolution allows those corresponding virtues to emerge. Hope and the other things. It's very useful stuff to have. Consider your success in resolving these conflicts. Are there particular things that you have trouble with? And what was happening in your world to cause that problem, or to cause you to not be able to resolve that conflict very well? What could you do about that? Because you can change this at any time, apply some conscious effort to doing that. Do some magic. Our language acquisition. Consider the way you speak and write. Is language easy or hard for you? Obviously not everybody has the same talents, and you know, Jan is very good at this. I love the fill in the blank thing. That's awesome. But then she's a teacher, so.
Teacher training, 101. Guidance.
So that was very awesome, yeah. But for other people, the written word is going to be, you know, their bugaboo. They're really not going to want to deal with that. So. Language acquisition is very much tied up in the cognitive development. If you do not know how to negotiate those assimilation, accommodation, and some of the other things, it's going to be very difficult for you to understand the language and be able to go from those concept-y things and pointing and making noises to using more sophisticated ways to communicate what you want.
Which is helpful.
Yeah. They think that language probably starts with the fetus recognizing speech and sounds, particularly from a mother, but other people are known to go up and talk to their bellies, so, you know, they're getting that idea right from the very start. Yeah. Skew in the nose, yeah. After that stage, we have the gestures and vocalizations used by the preverbal infant, crying and kicking and, you know, things that let you know what they want. As language acquisition progresses, new forms are subsumed by the old. So as we learn more sophisticated ways to communicate, that will replace the old ways that we knew. This partly has to do with, though, how far we get in that process will have to do with our brain chemistry and whether or not we have the talent for that kind of thing. Whether or not we can learn an IE language will be determined by how good our language skills and that portion of our brain that's controlling that is working. It is an open-ended and very productive process. It allows humans to create an infinite set of utterances from a finite set of elements. Most people who have a written language have some kind of alphabetic kind of thing. Although there are those who have symbolic writing and have many more characters to sort through than we do, but I kind of like it. There's only 26 or so to work with.
Keeps it limited.
Yeah. I'm not sure I could do that at this late date. So. It is considered unique in humans that language is able to refer to abstract concepts. They don't think that some other species can do quite that same thing. Yeah, they can't prove it yet.
I still think Jen's very smart.
Yeah, we know of Coco the gorilla and some other animals that have learned, you know, thousands of words and can put them into pretty sophisticated
originated idioms.
ideas, and they can put them into pretty sophisticated sentences and you know, learn a little bit of structure of, you know, how to communicate with their humans, but they don't seem to do well with the imagined or hypothetical or things about the past and future very well. So we know that there is definitely a difference in there, and humans are pretty unique in that we all get that to some degree. Although, most of the studies show that in large part, our language acquisition may come by imitation of others around us. So, I'm not sure if we have to make it as complicated as it really is. You want to learn to speak better?
Thank goodness we all don't have to make up our own language in order to figure each other out. That would be bad.
That would be bad. about the structure and sequence of the speech sounds. So, it's like how the word is formed. Trying to pronounce something in Gaelic is obviously not the same as trying to do it in English, although either one sucks, but it does. The semantics, the vocabulary, and how the concepts are expressed through the words. That is probably the one where most people run into trouble of trying to communicate an idea, is because my connotation is different than yours. Those semantics come into a really big point of contention there about what I meant by what I said, and what you heard is probably different, even though it was the same words. So that one's a tough one.
Again,
That's why poetry works.
Sometimes, yeah.
Connotation is what makes poetry possible.
And it can be beautiful for everybody, even though they didn't understand the same thing. So, yeah, you get wiggle room that way. Grammar.
is your friend, use it.
Sure. It's never my favorite part of it.
Depending on
The
which of it
rules
you
about,
believe in.
generating a sentence in a language.
Can we just ditch all the 18th century flash? We don't need no negative rule.
And the pragmatics, the rules for appropriate and effective communication. You would speak differently to a child, your friend, the priest. There are greetings of welcome, confrontation. There are certain ways you communicate that are better than others. So learning effective communication is part of the acquisition. Linguistics describes and explains human language in form, meaning, and context. This is part of where we start looking at the pretty words that we're going to say. What form does it have? What structure or grammar do we want to use? What language do we want to put it in? Sometimes putting it in that other language that is not our native tongue gives us a way to look at it differently and think about it differently and have a different connotation. The meaning has to do with the conveyance, the processing, and assigning of meaning through logical structures. Those pieces we just talked about, the phonology and the semantics and those things.
Do you find that you get different results? Or do you accept the results differently?
What?
Well, like if you're speaking in a different language, you're expecting a result.
You mean magical?
Yeah. Do you get something different?
I mean, what you get what you're asking for.
Or how do you know what you're asking for if you don't know the language?
I think a lot of it comes down to,
Just ask for anything that I didn't know. The question's mildly puzzling because
I think part of it might come down to if it's a language that is not your native language, then theoretically you have to put more time and more thought into developing whatever that is, which in and of itself is going to give you
Now that I
different,
a better understanding of what that is.
results.
and the question of why barbarous names do the trick for some people is an order of linguistics we won't really approach at this point.
Yeah.
Why the ancients recited long strings of syllables that did not have immediate linguistic content.
Right.
You don't want to necessarily put a ring bind tattoo on your you know what it means.
For instance,
Or get a Chinese symbol
Chinese
tattoo.
symbol, yeah.
make sure you know what that Chinese character really is.
Name your daughter McKenna. That's the first name. Really? You just named your daughter son McKenna.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's see. Context. The broader context in language is influenced by these social, cultural, historical, and political factors. There are some theories about where language really kind of comes from in the brain, and it may refer to the innate model of the brain that allows people to undertake the linguistic behaviors and to learn to speak. So there may be something that we're born with. I think also it can be the communication system that we develop because we need to be able to talk to each other in some fashion or another. It's probably the combination thereof. These are some of the ways we got to be who we are. Think about that. Write a few words. What are the first things that come to you when you say, who am I? Why am I here? And where do I belong? Some of this self-awareness You know, we don't know where we want to go unless we know where we are. So who are we? Because that makes a difference about how we think, how we've come to be who we are. So think about that for a couple of seconds and do sort of like the
Fill in the blanks.
Rorschach test thing. What's the first thing you think of when? It's like, who am I? Most of us will be drawn to labels of things that we are to other people, but it's much more about who are you to yourself.
Not yet.
No?
The
Oh,
electric wasn't turned on.
Ah,
coffee's not ready yet.
There's a search looking at.
Yeah, I know, it's a tough question. Okay.
That question.
All right, we'll move on. We can think some more about it.
The other one. Those were easy.
Once we know how to think, how to communicate a little bit, have a little bit of an idea of how our world works, we start having these conflicts about what is right and what is wrong, and how do we decide what that is. Also, again, notice your thoughts about these topics. If something really comes to you, make a note about it so we can talk about it.
With the thoughts on language, if we move from between ourselves as humans, is part of our work with the spirits to deal with, let's find where the commonality of language and symbols are to be able to start communication.
ask you that later.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah.
Yes.
I suppose it's like meeting anybody who doesn't necessarily speak the language that we consider native to ourselves. You have to figure out how to speak to them, how to find some kind of common language, a place to start so that you can understand what the communication means between you. Right, and that's going to mean something different to everybody, regardless of what you throw out there. So. Our moral development then. Morality is about how to treat one another regarding our justice, rights, and of the other's welfare. Consider the impact of attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs and emotions on morality. Consider the influence of parents and peers, society and culture, conscience and values, empathy and altruism, and all the other factors that come in with emotional and other societal and cultural values. Many of the influences on moral development have to do with the things we've already talked about, of how we are raised and what our brain chemistry is, and just all the kinds of things that come up in our world. And interpersonal interactions, the ability to understand intentions. If by chance you are on the Asperger's spectrum, and you don't have the same understanding of emotions, this is going to greatly skew how you see things and how you think the world works. The stereotypes, prejudices, and discriminations that we come to ourselves or that are foisted upon us by others will make a huge difference on what we think is right and wrong. Whether we're included or excluded in our social groups will have an impact on how we think about that. Primary emotions that are closely linked to moral behavior has to do with the guilt and shame and empathy and sympathy. If you don't have a very good emotional development and don't understand what those emotions are, you may have a much broader definition of what good and bad behavior is because you don't necessarily feel the guilt associated with something. We will be influenced by our culture and the conventions of that culture. The other things to do with society, of how things are done. We have attitudes and behaviors regarding the allocation of resources. Do you live in a life of plenty where you pretty much always have what you want when you want it and you don't have to go without much? But think about a time in your life perhaps when that was not true. If you were living out of a van and you didn't have access to running water perhaps, or things like that. That's going to change your definition of what's good and bad behavior at that situation. It can become very situational. We still have to deal with the societal standards of right and wrong interactions, regardless of where we live, because most of us don't live on that mountaintop all by ourselves, where we get to make all the rules. So we have to manage to make it along okay in our society. Kohlberg is our guy for moral development. He's got 3 levels with 6 stages, and it's all arranged so nice and neatly. And life just doesn't work that way.
What was his field?
I believe it was in the psychosocial development area, but much more with the emotional and psychological portion of that. I'm not sure what I put on slides in order, but in the very beginning, we're pretty much about if I get punished for this, I will probably stop doing that. There are those who like the punishment, so you're going to have a different problem there, but for most of us, negative reinforcement will tend to lead us toward other behavior. At that stage, we believe a right action will avoid punishment. That's really about all it amounts to. As we get a little bit older and move into the self-interest orientation, we've broadened that a little bit of a right action is the one that will get me reward or assistance with the action. So we can think outside ourselves a little bit more of including other people in this process. In the conventional processing level, we have an interpersonal accord and conformity stage. Right action will garner the pleasure or approval of others. This is what a good person does. This is the social norm kind of pieces of behavior. And we move into authority and social order maintaining. The right action is one that furthers the individual's role in society or furthers the social order. When we go to post-conventional, we have the social contract orientation. A right action is one that will further social well-being and support the obligation of each member of society to all other members. The last stage is this universal ethical principles, one that is in harmony with the individual's conscience and the universal principles of everybody else.
It doesn't mean with everybody else. It means as if there were such a thing as universal ethics.
Right. Because not everybody's doing the same thing to begin with. The stages go in the same order for everybody, but not everybody hits all the stages. You can understand all the stages below you. If you've already gone through that, you can understand that. But you can probably only comprehend parts of the one stage above you. Each stage brings a more comprehensive perspective to integrate with the previous. You've got to do some assimilation and accommodation as you move through this process, because it may very well change how you see how the world works. The right action is justified by the rationale used. I had the little things in parentheses about right action, will, kind of statements. And so depending on where you're at with your thinking about that is how you're going to justify those. Mm-hmm. What is your go-to way to decide things? Where have you settled into that process? Morals and ethics can be taught and learned at any stage of life. And it comes in stages, just like any other developmental process. We do not get this dumped on us wholesale. we keep figuring out new pieces of information and fitting it into our worldview, or changing the worldview to make the pieces of information fit one way or another. Formal education is considered one of the single most influential factors in our moral development. And by that they mean
Especially by education.
college level kinds of things, because they're supposed to be more on that critical thinking and teaching you how to think rather than just regurgitate material. Studying and learning about other people's cultures, the diversity, seeing how other people come to decisions, or what other people think is good and bad, can help you either broaden or narrow those ways of thinking for yourself. Ethics, in general, are standards of behavior for human actions and interactions. They are not how you feel about it, what your religion says about it, what the law says about it, what science has proved about it, or the norms of the other people around you.
What did we decide?
The big part here is how do we
Where did you
decide
get that list?
what
Yeah.
those standards are?
And why aren't they? And
Several.
why aren't ethics? What are they other than those things?
Because the standards of behavior in any particular situation are so specific to that, you know, so the ethics tend to be very situational to begin with. Several of the places that I looked through on, started with Wikipedia, but go out to the resources that they look at.
Yeah.
And everybody says the same thing of, these standards are not somebody else's list.
Well,
This
isn't,
is your list for dealing with all of somebody
let me
else's.
see, the word ethics is often used to refer to codified standards of professional behavior.
Yes. it
And
is.
those are exactly several of those things.
Yes, some of them are. Some of them are.
So what kind of ethics other than that are we talking about? We talking about personal standards of behavior? And do we need, is there a vocabulary word that separates that from ethics?
I do not find any that it is. But you will have codes of ethics. I've got one, listed in here. Because,
Yeah, exactly.
I'm a licensed social worker, so the
Right.
National Association of Social Workers has their code of ethics. And it's
Right.
very specific to that.
I've heard so much discussion about the distinction between ethics and morals, and none of it has beaten connotation in any case.
Right.
None of it transcends the connotation of the words in any case.
There are some very well thought out theories of ethics, and they're hard to say. Deontological ethical theory is about the absolutes, the very definitive, the imperatives that are involved in that. It's very much about people being treated as the ends, never as the means. Human life has value, always tell the truth, do no harm, people are of equal value, all of that kind of thing. All the situations are seen in a similar context. And it doesn't take into account very much what society and culture is bringing to this. They look to equal the playing field, and for that reason it can be very black-white, either or, and life is not really that way.
Genocide is always wrong.
Unless it's...
Is an example of deontological morality or ethics.
And that's where the conflict comes in until it's not. Yeah.
Pedophilia was as nasty for Socrates as it is for the Pope. Or the next Pope.
It's very difficult to have a pure deontological path because the consequences do factor into our decisions. Our emotions make a difference to us, and it's very difficult to put all that aside to just look at it in this, very flat, universal kind of way. Even under this, which I think it kind of is in conflict with itself to a point, is that the theological theory is based on religious beliefs and promotes the greatest good. Well, that's great that it promotes the greatest good, but if you're basing it on
Alleged.
religious beliefs, whose religion and who's good? So you've already got a problem. But the categorical imperative assumes that the ethical truth is innate. Therefore, that will cause people to act in the proper manner. Well, we've already shown that
Except,
our developments don't run along the exact same lines. So what you were born with is not the same as what somebody else was born with, and it all changes right after that. So we're gonna have problems there.
Interesting.
The teleological ethical theory concentrates much more on the outcomes. So the consequences of your actions is where this comes in. The ends justifies the means. This is the exact opposite of where we were just at with deontological. But they're not looking at the motive or intentions either. It's all about the outcome. Did it turn out all right? Well, then what we did was okay. And that is okay until it's not also.
Like our banks.
Under this heading is the utilitarianism, providing the greatest good for the greatest number of people, which unfortunately can be used to justify the, if it feels good, do it kind of thing, and not look at the consequences that this is supposed to be considering.
more unfortunately, can be used to justify the certain people aren't worthy of the resources it takes to keep them alive.
Everybody's equal, but some are more equal than others. You can kind of have lots of ways around these things.
Those who don't contribute can starve.
Yeah. So if the greatest number of people benefit though, what about some of the rest of us? If we're not in that group, yeah, we could be screwed. So.
Well, Spock said because in the many out of the table business or whatever. I've never worked, right? You know what I mean? The rest of you just allow.
Yes, the Vulcans were pretty utilitarian, as far as you can tell. Except when they were pragmatists, so that's how Spock could be in the Federation.
Existentialism, every person is free to experience all the world has to offer. Free will, personal responsibility, and the human experience are foremost. Here again, this is very much about satisfying your personal wants and desires, and may fail to look at consequences to everybody else around you for that.
Well, that's the responsibility clause.
And
In that.
kind of, yeah. But when you call it personal responsibility, well, if I could justify it to myself, it will be okay.
Means you're personally responsible for what happened.
Yeah, that's what it should be. Pragmatism. Right action is whatever is practical and useful for both the people solving the problem and the people needing the assistance. I kind of like how that sounds. Again, though, we're dealing with outcomes, and that would make it really inconsistent in going from situation to situation. You may not be able to have a blanket place to start from if you have to look at the situation every single time to find out what is most useful and best for everybody.
Well, it also has to do with motivation. Some kinds of ethical thinking think that it matters why you do things. Thinks that if you're trying to do good, failing is still, and you screw up and harm is done, well, you were trying to do good.
Right.
Whereas the pragmatist would say that ill intentions often produce good results.
Yes.
And vice versa. That, you can't sin in your mind. You can't sin by meaning to screw somebody up by doing good for them.
Yeah.
There's also a location where our author practically comes into this instead of the other does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It isn't about your intention. It's about your deed.
Yes, I may intend to make all the people in the world good people, but I can't just kill off everyone who's bad.
Right. First, going about that, killing off all the perceived bad people has been tried before. So far, without desirable results.
Good intentions officer, I swear. Exactly. Whoops, and die.
I've been considering a new slogan, end the war on evil. That's not easy, is it? Make peace with hell.
Evil to say that out loud. logic for the basis of decision making.
Then ends up making no
I
decisions.
got it.
Logic works great, you can apply any premises you want to logic and get any result you're after.
Statistics,
Maybe
yeah.
I'm wrong with confidence.
Be wrong with confidence.
Do we have a slide of what the definition of good and the definition of evil?
Oh, God, no.
Like, no.
Not at all. You need to try. The natural law ethical theory is about focusing on an end person that stays in accord with human nature and goals. This is the one where the most basic precept is, do good, avoid evil.
Oops.
Yeah, because that's easy. There are two divisions under that. Again, we're looking at theistic and non-theistic. We drag our gods into it again.
And even more scary, natural law.
Yeah, and they both hold that the natural law has
Equally
precedence over
mythological.
man-made. Yeah, so, yeah, it's kind of
Especially when we're into politics.
the unicorn version of it, I suppose. Transcultural ethical theory, this is out of one of my social work books, as we try to come up with cultural competence and centering on the diversity in culture and beliefs, they've had to sort of rethink some of this and try to come up with that if you're going to be dealing with different people with individual cultures and values, that all of that needs to be considered in the context of problem solving and decision making. Really complicates things and makes it much more difficult to communicate because then your shared language goes shrink, and you have to come up with language to even talk about the problem to begin with in order to come up with decision making. But I think there's great value in looking at the values of everybody involved in the process. You know, you're going to have some who are trying to stop the war on evil and some who are trying to do something entirely different over here. So you got to look at how that's going to come out.
We have extra concerns, but you must wear two. It's like, he's so straight, he's wearing two ties.
Ethical relativism, multiculturalism, or moralism holds that respect and equality are due to all groups. Decision-making must consider the principles within culture and society. The challenge is to prioritize the values to be considered. Who's going to make the list? Who's going to decide which thing is more important? Again, you're looking at heavy communication's got to happen.
Outlawing cannibalism for cannibals.
Probably not going to work out real well.
Well, they do it.
For their life expectancy. Let's see. I don't remember who decided to do this one. 5 approaches. Oh, this one's from the Marcula Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University. I am grateful to these fine folks for having boiled these things down to such lovely and concise information. In that utilitarian thing, most good and or the least harm. Lots of people believe in this, and I think it's a good place to start. And when you can boil things down to the fewest number of principles to work with, you end up with fewer conflicts, and it makes the language of talking about decision-making easier to do. Because it doesn't come down to such definitive kinds of things or be regulated to a particular path or bent that it's trying to accomplish. You get a broader place to start. You can talk about more things. The rights orientation of it is all about respecting and protecting moral rights. Another way to look at doing the most good and the least harm. The justice model is trying to treat all people equally or justifiably unfair.
When you have to put somebody in jail for a while, which is unfair to that person, obviously.
There needs to be a reason to treat them unfairly, but if you've got a good enough reason, that still fits, the justice model. Common good is what's going to contribute to the good of all members of whatever society, belief, culture, that you're talking about at the time. That may be 2 people, but nevertheless, it should contribute to everyone's good in the process. The virtue model is promoting good through ideal virtues. Or striving to achieve that ideal, you will come up with good decisions. Consider which kinds of these approaches or mixes of this resonates the most with you. When you start to think about doing the right thing, what does that entail? Do you look at the outcome first? Do you look at the process that's got to happen? Do you want to define what that goal you're working toward is right up front? Are you willing to be a little more laissez-faire about it and negotiate and change things as they come up? How do you think about it? Another way to look at what's right for yourself or others is to look at something like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We have a hard time even thinking about some of these higher level things on this first slide here, the transcendence.
We started at the top.
Yes, we do. We have a hard time thinking about this stuff if we have not met our basic needs. Somebody, I think it was Maslow actually, invented this meta-motivation of going beyond what's basic to strive for continual betterment. Working toward self-actualization was the pinnacle of his thing. He started out with 5 levels, and it has been expanded and changed a little bit. And he never actually made it into a pyramid. It just kind of happened that way because you can see in the book how it looks like a pyramid when you write it out. So it just kind of ended up that way. But that really wasn't part of the process to begin with. So I find that funny in that we understand it as this pyramid and trying to reach the pinnacle, and that we've come to this language to describe it simply because of the way it looks when it's written out, probably.
Instead of doing it for the work.
Yeah, I don't know. That is how we come to understand it.
Symbols.
And it is more than likely that if our basic needs are met, then we have the time and effort and energy to think about what more is there? What more can I get out of this life than have a place to live, food to eat, and clothes to wear, weather, all those kinds of things. If all that's in place, then we start to wonder, what more is there? What more can I get? Consider what your personal code of conduct might look like. I have several examples here. This lovely man was writing a book about ethics, and he really liked the duality of the do no harm, but at the same time is also the do good. And he had a whole list of statements that are typed in a booklet, and we won't go through all of that. But it makes it very simple to look at it. Do this or don't do that. That's what it is. Many of us started out with the wicked ring and harm none, do what you will. ADF has the 9 virtues: wisdom, piety, vision, courage, integrity, perseverance, hospitality, moderation, and fertility. Still working on my dedicated path stuff, but it makes you think a lot about trying to define that for yourself and find examples of it, and how does that fit in your life, really helps you suss out and refine how you feel about that process and how you want to go about that decision making. Discovered that the silver rule is sort of the negative wording process of the golden rule. Do not do unto others which would not have them do unto you. I always kind of liked the golden rule of doing unto as they would have you do. But my new favorite is the platinum rule. Do unto others as they would have done unto them. Find out what they want. Do not feed me gluten-laden pizza. That is not what I want. This will not better my world at all. So,
Whether or not you want it.
yeah, it will not better me. So,
The counter one is do unto others before they do unto
that's
others.
all different.
Utilitarian.
Very much. I was very tempted to put thing in there because I think it was, I don't know, equally as long as all my notes put together to have the entire thing there. I don't belong at NASW anymore, but I haven't been working for a while either, but I do like how they have this laid out. The standard values are listed here for you about service and social justice, dignity and weight of the person, that kind of thing. I like the idea that they have come up with something. It's very similar to the idea that I see in ADF with the 9 virtues and other things like that. Of here's some things that we consider really important in this culture and in this way. The Hippocratic Oath, many people find that very helpful. The text is listed out in the workbook, but it boils down frequently to the first do no harm thing. Again, you're looking at who decides what the harm is, and so therein lies the problem. Flipping through something else, and under codes of conduct, you get pirate code as well. I found it interesting that it spells out very clearly what will happen too. Who gets what kind of shares? What will happen if you commit a particular crime? You know, that kind of stuff. And it's very helpful to have those kinds of rules to live by. You know exactly where you stand, but you know, they're just guidelines, really. Right? But they did appear to be quite strict. But I can see if you're trapped on the ship.
Yeah, fire rules really count. Great good of all wise, get your fire yourself.
All kinds of stuff like that. And one that has struck with me for a long time was watching Dragonheart and seeing the old code listed there. A knight is sworn to valor, his heart knows only virtue. I really like those ideas and the idea, at least romantic notion of chivalry and those things. But again, it gives you that ideal, something to strive for, a way to look at it and form that as how can I apply that to my situation. So what does your code of conduct look like? What kinds of things really mean that to you in doing the right thing, and doing the right for yourself and others, those consequences and outcomes? The decision-making processes. Again, still every bit as complicated and zillions of ideas. An ethical principles screen is a way to look at decision-making from inside the process of decision-making. What they're talking about is prioritizing your ethical principles. If you've decided you're going to follow the old code, what order do they go in? And what thing comes first? What's going to have the most import to you?
So what screen there means something you project something on or something you sift something through?
I think we're sifting at this
Okay.
point. Because we're looking at prioritizing items, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Using ethical principles to screen your decision.
Good
Okay.
distinction there. Yeah. The collaborative model is very similar to some of the other things we talked about, of identifying the people that are in the dilemma so that we can look at everybody's viewpoint to find out what solution is going to best solve this problem. Almost all decision-making processes have these 5 cognitive process components. You name the dilemma. You have to come up with what the problem is. You sort out the issues that are surround that. You just come up with some kind of solution to the problem. You evaluate what the outcome was and reflect on the process. So then maybe the next time that comes up, you can make a better decision if that was possible. Or maybe this was the exact right, I want to do that again, but reflecting on it to know that. There are issues with decision-making models. The models are usually in a linear progression. This is what you do, then you do this next, blah, blah, blah. Life is not that way. The models attempt to be objective and rational. People really aren't that. They also may attempt to cast people as detached observers. Like, I can look at this problem over here and, well, there's the solution. We are just not that way. We have many emotions and particulars that are going to be different even when we're in the same situation.
Now, you phrased that in that way, But it would be easy to phrase it back around and say that even though life is confused, your ethical process will be well served by sorting it out into a linear track. And that even though you and the other people in the party may or may not have been objective and rational when you did X, now you have the opportunity to be, as you deal with the ethical consequences of X, and that learning to observe as a detached observer is in fact a part of wisdom. All in all, doesn't ethics come under the virtue of wisdom? I suppose it does.
It has a lot of.
And well, envision certainly helps, I suppose.
Hospitality.
It's taking that knowledge and experience.
By the time you get into the third function, virtues, you're pretty down to earth. But yes, you're right, hospitality, all the virtues are virtues and therefore have to do with ethics.
Right.
But being able to parse them is a skill of wisdom.
True. And that is why we have these frameworks.
Yeah.
And people working on these models so that perhaps we have a better way to look at it than
Just a variety of ways to look at it.
Yeah. This fellow named Congress has come up with one that he even named the ethic model, and each one of these starts with a letter of the word ethic, so that you could possibly help to remember it. But it's the exact same kinds of steps. Look at the issue, think about how to apply those standards, think of possible consequences, identify the benefit and harm, consult with somebody else about the choice. Nobody said you had to do this by yourself.
And that's a transvaluation model. That is not assuming that there's such a thing as universal ethical principles.
Exactly so. Pagan's model is very much the same. Describe it, consider it, examine it, resolve it. You know, that kind of stuff. Evaluate. Almost all of them have some kind of reflection or evaluation. Don't just do it and drop it. Look at it and find out how you can apply it later. See where it has led you, and if that's where you want to go again. It's being a little more purposeful about it, I think, is probably the biggest piece of it. A framework for decision. These people have Mark II. I love them. If you guys want to look up their site, they have quite remarkable information about this. Recognizing, getting the facts, evaluating alternative actions. Same kinds of processes, a little bit different language, a little bit different aspects.
Hint of
Make it
pragmatism here.
Yeah.
Hint of pragmatism, make a decision and test it. You may screw up. Point 5, did you screw up? No.
Try not to do it again.
Right. Start at top. Right, rinse and repeat.
This particular context of ethics from Mr. Hartzell at Cal State University was a little bit new to me, but I kind of like it. He's got the take that the fewer values you have, the less conflicts you will have among them. So if we sort this down to
Kill everyone.
down to the most basic things, his choices were life, choice, and relationship. If what you're looking to do is support life in its process.
Which includes death.
Which includes death. That is a process.
Affirming life means affirming death.
Affirming death. Choice, acknowledge the available options, and allow free selection among them. That's an important piece of that. And communicate in ways that promote continued communication.
Wait,
That's the relationship. Don't burn those bridges. Let's try to keep that going.
Emails that say this conversation is at an end should be avoided.
Please find by standing in the bakery saying, I'm taking this loaf of bread and
Yeah.
I'm not paying for it.
Well, yeah, that's right.
He holds that if all three of these are equally valued and not prioritized one among the other, you cannot resolve a situation ethically if any of the elements has to be sacrificed one for another. You have to be able to consider all three of those things. Maximizing each element leads to the best possible resolution of conflict. If you can go to the level of honoring all three of those in an equal measure with your solution, that is your best solution. No one is may violate another person's context. So that life and choice and relationship has to be held for everybody involved in the situation.
Even if they don't hold the same value.
What is ethical in a relationship is determined from within that relationship. You're not using somebody else's outside rules. You're negotiating that inside the relationship that's having the conflict. And the nature of a relationship is determined by open, voluntary negotiation of what that means to the people in it. Again, communication is like the big key. You have to come to some common language and be able to have an understanding that all goes together.
You know, the further away you get from cultural hypnosis, Moses came down with the rules, kind of external moral-based ethics, the more it seems to me that you reach the point where you realize that your decisions will be more or less ethical based on circumstances. That it will never be possible to satisfy your best ethic at all times.
Right.
And that you're just taking your best shot.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these development models help you decide what that consists of.
Yes. Yes.
So excellence at that particular day may mean half-assed.
Adequacy may be as close to excellence as you get.
Right. Okay is okay. So where do you stand and how will you decide about something? I want to talk about what I call impossible choice. You are presented with two sandwiches. You don't know where they came from, but you can really only eat one sandwich. They're both made exactly the way your favorite sandwich is made. There's no real ethical problem here, other than I can only eat one sandwich. How do I decide when all things are equal? It's kind of that impossible choice kind of thing. Now add in the part where two of your most favorite people in the world bring you these sandwiches that they have made with love, and they are both standing there offering you these sandwiches. Now, how do you decide what's
Eat them both and get fat.
Already you can see, I can see the wheels turning and everybody's going, oh, okay, what do I do so that, because the subtext becomes, if I reject your sandwich, I have rejected you. And there are other issues that are involved in that, because we are emotional creatures.
Enter a complex linguistic negotiation in which you bring them to understand that rationally objective, it doesn't mean a crap.
My pet solution was cut them both in thirds and everybody's going to eat sandwich now.
Very Solomon.
So I don't want to make everybody happy all the time. So there's that problem. Another end of that is about, well, I've got serial killers down here. I've been catching up on watching Dexter.
Yeah, that's right, the ethical serial killer.
The ethical serial killer. What do you do? If you've decided killing is always wrong, and so you've even, if you've convinced yourself that the vegetables don't have a real life that you're killing, if you can manage to do that, so you've gone vegan, you return the spiders to the wild rather than step on them, the whole thing. But what do you do when the serial killer takes out the other serial killer? Did you want,
Well, or do you kill in self-defense?
Or if you kill in self-defense, or, I'm sure there are other situations.
There aren't actually any ethical systems that say that killing is always wrong.
No.
That's a modern hippie kind of thing.
They try to, but.
There are absolutely none. All ethical systems justify killing in various circumstances.
Right.
Murder is defined as illicit killing. These modern attempted moral thinkers who say that all killing is murder simply aren't paying any attention to human life, in my opinion. Killing in war is not murder. Judicial killing is not murder. The Bible says thou shalt not murder. It does not say thou shalt not kill.
Right.
The Bible's full of reasons to kill people.
So we have to.
Epics as well.
Right. There were no pagan cultures that did not when killing was appropriate and what kind of killing was more appropriate than others.
And it's still not what kind of retribution.
Yeah,
You do that, you pay the blood price, and it's done.
Well, that was justice, that was their version. Yeah, but it assumed that killing would happen. The blood price system assumed that,
And you've done your penance and made it right, and it's all forgotten.
well, it actually left judge, jury, and executioner in the hands of the individual sword holder in a lot of cases.
And then you have the sacrificial version of it.
Yeah, large quantities of humans living in cities made that impractical.
I
So
love
it's
reading novels
blood
about
feud
murders
bad.
and
It's
stuff.
pretty, yeah.
There's only a few things
They killed the
Christianity
serial
did.
killer at the end, it's like awesome. He needed to die. Now, I would feel horrible if somebody actually were to do that in person.
Right.
What about you read about the book? It's like, it needs that.
Where was the consequence then of killing the original being to create the world?
Who knows? Obviously,
There's no other world.
obviously, when the original being was killed, the blood debt was purified immediately through use and sacrifice. The original killing was a sacrificial killing, one of the many kinds of holy killing.
And then one of three things could have happened depending which one of the three died in certain
Yes, perhaps. But since we're here, we know which one it was.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to consider what we might do in the case of sandwiches and serial killers, but it's all that stuff in between that we have to think about. And we come back to these questions about who am I, why am I here, and where do I belong in thinking about that.
Oh, there's whatever. If you're, what are difficult things for paganism? Vengeance. Vengeance was maybe not an active virtue, but it was certainly considered part of justice. I myself now, in looking at our judicial system, don't want vengeance to be considered.
Right.
I'm not interested in getting revenge on the committers of crime. I'm interested in a best outcome for society justice system. That's why, I don't even believe in having the family's feelings matter.
Well, and if
I
you
don't
look at it,
think judges and juries should get to hear the feelings of the family involved, because it's not about making them feel better.
we've got a case up by us right now, Penny, where a man turned a corner, an old woman
What?
walked
Oh
into
my
his
God.
and she died. And they're prosecuting him because her family is throwing such fits, and they have got a lot of political ties.
Well,
And
that's the
it's
whole
just
thing.
raging on both sides right now on whether that's the right thing to do or not.
I mean, on the total other side of that, the Islamic justice system for crime is all about the family.
Yeah.
If somebody kills your brother and you think there's a reason to not have them prosecuted, the family chooses whether or not the murderer is prosecuted. So it's exactly about that from that perspective.
We deal with in juvenile court, I work with a lot of probation officers, but the thing that comes up over and over again is that it is not about punishment, it's about affecting change. It's about affecting change in the child. And so it's not about vengeance, it's not about you did something wrong and now I'm going to do this to you. This is not society's ideal for you, so we're going to have you do this, and hopefully through that you will learn to do something better, whatever that better is.
See, when we take up magic, we suddenly have a sword again. Like that judge, jury, and executioner. We can do it from, behind the screen of the mist or whatever, and the urge to vengeance is, of course, one of the standard urges that leads to questions of magical ethic. We suddenly are able to sit in our temple and pass judgment on the behaviors of others and attempt to do something about it remotely.
So that leads us to the end of this discussion of what magic under what circumstances is ethical for me, which is what you've been talking about. One of the things that I know gets brought up quite regularly, and I encourage you to think about it as much as talk later about it, because I think got about done, is what to do to do magic for someone who doesn't necessarily know you're doing it, has approved of that, you know. Think
There-
about those kinds of.
Another
issues,
standard that
but-
no one ever heard of before 20
Right,
years ago. That's
right.
a totally modern, invented standard. Nobody ever heard of that until recently, I'm not sure.
I personally have no problem with
Remote
that.
do-gooding?
Yeah.
I don't know, you know, not that attempted, like we said, good intentions can result in ill outcomes.
Totally right, yes.
Skill and wisdom.